Hello, and welcome to my channel. This is my first attempt at a no-sleep narration, and given the fact that I am horribly lazy, I have decided to use my voice to tell it rather than writing it down for those of you on Reddit or those of you on YouTube. I would emphasize that everything in this story is true. If you find that hard to believe, well, you haven't taken my migraine medication. Let's begin. I had never had migraines before my late 20s. I'd always been pretty healthy and athletic. I knew what the word, migraine meant, but nothing about the pain it implied. However, by my early 30s, after years of graduate study and degrading eyesight and God knows what else, I developed migraines that left me crippled and in bed for days. After some persuasion, fearing I'd have to abandon my work and studies, I eventually agreed to see my general practitioner. He looked at the computer screen in front of him and concluded that my asthma meant the usual medication would not work for me, and prescribed me instead something that would help me sleep, in hopes that this would help my migraines. But he warned me that, at least initially, it may cause strange dreams and nightmares. So, I took the prescription and filled it, with a sense of desperation. I was told to take it in the evenings before bed, and so, with a glass of water, I did. And thus, so began my weird dreams. These dreams were strange in character. In these dreams, I was not myself. I was absorbed into the personalities or the perspectives of others throughout history, people whose lives I have not seen or been intimately engaged with. My first dreams were strange. I was a Polish soldier in the 1800s, a stockbroker in the 1920s, a 10-year-old Ghanaian girl in 1880. Strange visions of lives and perspectives I had no experience of things my waking life could give me little or no insight upon. The standard somatic model of dreams as a chimera of living experiences could not be explained, or could not explain this, at least to me. However, of all of these strange dreams, one stands out to me beyond all the others. That is of Richard, a 40-something mountain climber, English, rugged and handsome, determined, and his friend Sam, and what befell them on their climb up an unknown mountain. I saw through Richard's eyes as the two men went up the mountain through a growing blizzard. I do not know the mountain, and the dream and its details never implied anything. I have the distinct feeling it would have been somewhere, and could have been somewhere, in rural Wales or Scotland. But this is likely an affect of my own experience as mountain climbing, and not something inferred, or to be inferred directly from any of the events of the dream itself. For all I know, the mountain could have been anywhere. All I recall is that we, began up the side of the mountain, and the blizzard began to grow fierce. Fiercer, I knew, than these men could have been possibly expecting. After some time, frostbitten, sluggish, and beginning to falter in their attempts to reach the peak, as if by some miracle, a cabin emerged into view. The cabin struck me, and maybe them, as odd given its placement. While the drifts of snow were everywhere around the mountainside, the cabin had no drifts around its four walls. I got the impression that it did not belong here. It reminded me, the real me, of the sort of cabin one would expect in Appalachian hills. Not some strange and potentially foreign or European mountainside. We entered the cabin, Sam and I, and found some scant rations and leftover items. The cabin was a sort of bunkhouse, 4 beds with clean linen sat equally spaced in the center of the room. A small stove sat empty in one corner. I watched, from Richard's perspective, as the 2 men struggled to find the woodpile outside the cabin, start a fire, and eat, both from their own rations and from some of the meager supplies they had found. Soon, having eaten, they lay down in 2 of the beds and began awaiting an end to the storm. An innumerable amount of time later, I awoke, still within Richard's eyes, seeing from his perspective. I turned around the cabin and looked to see Sam still sleeping in the cot near me. It would be impossible to tell, but I gathered I had been asleep a very long time. The fire seemed to have long since died, and the food from our plates was crusted and molded on the floor. The plates themselves still unwashed. However, the storm also still raged. Half of me thought to get out of bed and to find more wood for the fire and clean the place. But as I lay there, sleep once again overtook me. And as I drifted off, I half imagined I saw figures outside of the cabin and heard the distinct clinking of chains and groaning. But the soporific effect upon me was so strong I began once again to doze off. Awaking again, a yet further innumerable amount of time later, I immediately began to panic. I knew too much time had passed and I could not fathom why or how I had remained so long in bed. I turned to shake a now bearded Sam from his slumber, but was unable. So I stood up, gathered myself, and hoped that the cold outside would ward off my incessant need to sleep. I gathered my coat and walking stick and proceeded out into the still raging blizzard to acquire wood, warm the place, and gradually wake Sam. Something, I concluded, must be done. We couldn't remain in this state of paralysis forever. However, as I wandered out the cabin door, I realized that the area around us had irrevocably changed. There was no mountain, so to speak, anymore. Just an endless snowy mass of white, cold, blistering air. As I peered into the distance, I finally saw them. These were not trees on the mountainside, just stagnant shadows on a flat, endless, snowy plain. As I approached them, I saw the truth. White, bony figures, their flesh as white as the snow, their eyes blackened. They were chained in a crucified pose to these giant wooden posts, as if in some bizarre arboric imitation. I screamed at the sight of their still living bodies, chained, and ran back to the cabin, and I began to shake Sam. At this point, I awoke in the waking world. I sincerely hoped the dream was nothing more than the side effect of medication, which with time did relieve my migraines and left me with little side effects. But part of me still wonders if by some cosmic psychic force I experienced through their very eyes why some mountain climbers disappear, never to be found, lost in their ventures to realities where they are, living or dead, eternally irretrievable.